The Gnats of Knotty Pine by Bill Peet. This is the same guy that wrote how Drufus the Dragon lost his head, so it's a little bit of a longer story. The giant bull moose shivered as he waded up the creek into the ravine. He shivered from his shivering was not from the chill in the air. The moose was shivering from fright. Tomorrow was the first day of hunting season, which meant terrible trouble for any of the creatures living in Knotty Pine Forest. The big fellow was on his way to a meeting of the animals, held every year on the day before all the shooting began. When the moose arrived at the meeting place, at the end of the ravine, a crowd had already gathered. Some were seated on boulders and logs, while others perched up on tree limbs. The purpose of the meeting was to try and figure out some plan to foil the hunters and save their own skins. An old brown bear was the first to speak, and he started things off on a sour note. "These meetings are a waste of time," he grumbled. "We all know the hunters are out after deer, the prize buck with a fancy pair of antlers. Let the deers worry." "But if they don't get one of us," protested a big buck, "they'll shoot anything on 4 legs." "Or on 2 legs," wailed a quail, "or anything that moves." "That's right," said a porcupine. "We're all in danger. Hunters to kill just for the fun of it. To them it's a game. They'll call it sport." "I had the wildest dream last night," said a squirrel. "I dreamed that I had a high-powered rifle and 2 hunters came along without their guns. When I took aim at them, they dropped to their knees, crying, 'Please, please, don't shoot. It's not fair. We don't have our guns. It's not fair, please.'" "Did you let him have it?" asked the bobcat. "No," said the squirrel, but I gave him a bad time." "Look, fellows," I said, "no need to get upset. This is only a little old game. It's a real fun sport. It wouldn't be much of a sport if your side always won, would it? Now it's your turn to lose for a change, so cheer up, my friends." I kept teasing the hunters until I had them in tears. Then I woke up laughing. "A lousy dream," snarled a bobcat. "Real dumb." "Hold it," said a fat possum. "We can't go on bickering like this. We must all stick together." "I say it's all for one and one for all." "You mean all for nothing," sneered a fox. "We all stick together, then get popped off all in one bunch. Real smart." Oh, I think that's two pages. "I've got an idea," said a jackrabbit. "We all take off at once, running around and around in all directions and all over the place until the hunters get so dizzy and mixed up that they can't shoot straight." "Ha ha," laughed the fox. "That's great. We'll run and run until we're all out of breath and fall on our faces. Then the hunters knock us off on their own good time. Just great." "Okay," said the rabbit. "If you're so smart, let's hear your plan." "I'm all ears." "I say we all do our own thing," said the fox. "The runners run, the climbers climb, the hiders hide, just like we always have." "I have to agree with the smart Aleck," said the moose. "But I do believe the fox is right. We have no other choice." After that, no one could think of a thing to say, and the crowd settled into deep silence. At this point, a swarm of gnats joined the meeting, and the top gnat, known as Nate, came buzzing alongside the moose right up to his ear. "Do you mind," said Nat, "if I have a few words, sir?" "Speak up," said the moose, "but make it short. There's no time for small talk." Nate shouted at the top of his voice to make sure all could hear. "We gnats of Knotty Pine have been thinking." "Gnats thinking?" snickered the fox. "Now I've heard everything." "When a billion gnats get their heads together," shouted Nate, "it adds up to one big brain with big ideas. We have thought of a plan to save you from the hunters." "Goody, goody," chortled the fox. "Our worries are over." "Not funny," growled the bear. "Gnats drive me bats." "Me too," grumbled the moose. Beat it, gnats. Scam. Buzz off, all of you." And with an angry snort, he blasted them out of sight. After the gnats had gone, there was another long silence. By this time, it was nearly sunset, and deep shadows crept down the ravine. Finally, the moose said, "We don't seem to be getting anywhere, so why don't we just call it a day?" Then the meeting broke up, and all the unhappy animals went their separate ways. As they left, the squirrel called out from a pine tree, "See you tomorrow, everybody." "Maybe so," said the moose, "and maybe not." At dawn the next day, a roaring of motors echoed through the trees as jeeps, campers, and pickup trucks came up the road below the forest. Then came the voices of the hunters, laughing and shouting as they hauled out their guns. Up in the forest, panic set in. The deer, the fox, and the rabbits raced off in all directions. The quail hid under bushes, and the porcupines and skunks crawled into hollow logs. Excuse me. The bear scrambled into a dense tangle of brush, and so did the moose, but alas, he left a great pair of antlers sticking out in full view. When the animals were all in their wild old frenzies, the hunters were as calm as could be, and ever so quiet. They knew that wild things have good ears and hoped to catch them by surprise. This was the first rule of the game, and as the men headed up the slope towards the forest, they walked very softly and talked in whispers, with their rifles all set for a shot. They were just a few yards away from the first clump of trees when all of a sudden, out of the grass swarmed great clouds of gnats, billions of them, and leading down each cloud was a fearless fight commander shouting orders. Go for their heads, go for their faces, go for their eyes, buzz them, drive them bats, go gnats, go gnats, go gnats, go. Now the hunters were the ones caught by surprise. The gnat's attack was so sudden and so blinding the hunters were sent staggering back on their heels. What in the blazes is this? One of them yelled. Gnats, you knothead, yelled another. Gnats, billions of them, the pesky little devils, they're driving me bats. In seconds, every last man was caught with his head in a great big buzzing cloud of gnats. The hunters grew into a rage, swatting and slapping wildly at the storm of tiny insects. Some swung away with their rifles hitting nothing but thin air. One rifle went off, kablam, barely missing one of the men. That did it. Let's get out of here, someone shouted, before we all get killed. Which way is out? Shouted another. Downhill, you dope, and the battle was over. The hunters dropped their rifles and fled down the hill to their campers, jeeps and pickups, and with a great roaring of motors, they took off. Just as the jeep disappeared into the distance, the gnats formed a big V for victory. They let go with a rousing cheer that could be heard for at least 20 feet. The victory was especially sweet since it was won without bloodshed. Not one single gnat was lost. Now all the creatures in the forest were deeply indebted to the gnats. Yet there was no way to thank a billion tiny insects scattered all over the forest one by one, so the big bull moose was called upon to thank them all at once. First he waded out into a stream, since he knew the sound carried better over the water. Then with all his great lung power and great moose cut loose, calling all gnats, he bellowed. Hear this, thanks a billion. The big thanks echoed for miles across the forest, and every single gnat heard it loud and clear. Of course, this made Gnat and the buzzing billions feel mighty big, and from that day on, whenever the roar of motors echoed through knotty pine forest, the gnats took to the air to meet the enemy head on. To them, it was a real fun game, real sport.